afternoon, and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Medelis, and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. And we have got a jam-packed program for you today. Our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez, is going to join us in just a few moments to talk about this California face mask ban, but he's also going to talk about a new study that has to do with Americans showing the highest rate of incarcerations when it comes to different laws that typically migrants are accused of breaking. So we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But first, let's take a look at some of the things making headlines across the border, starting with President Donald Trump's latest plan to overhaul the American immigration system has left some immigrant workers a little confused. Now, that left the White House on Saturday kind of scrambling to clarify that new $100,000 visa fee. Now, this fee is on visas for skilled tech workers and soon will go into effect. It only applies to new applicants and not to current visa holders. That's where the questions were arising for a lot of these folks. As I was saying. Now, the president on Friday signed a proclamation that will require the fee for what are known as H-1B visas, meant for high-skilled jobs that tech companies find hard to fill. Those who already hold H-1B visas and are currently outside of the country right now will not be charged $100,000 to re-enter. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said in a post on X, that's the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, that, quote, "This applies only to new visas, not renewals, and not current visa holders." Also making headlines in California, they have become the first state to ban most law enforcement officers from covering their faces while conducting official business. Now, Governor Gavin Newsom signed this measure into law officially on Saturday. The measure prohibits neck gaiters, ski masks, and other facial coverings for local and federal officers, and that does include ICE agents. There are some exceptions, however. It's a direct response to recent immigration raids in L.A. where federal agents covered their faces while making arrests. Now, critics say California does not have authority over federal agents and that the ban would put agents at risk. A top Homeland Security official calls it despicable and a flagrant attempt to endanger our officers. And now I want to bring in our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez, to kind of expand on this a little bit. How you doing, Julian?
Good to be back on the show.
So tell us a little bit about some of the history leading up to this thing getting signed on Saturday.
Well, what I can tell you is that ever since President Trump took office and began to execute his mass deportations agenda, we have here in the community in Texas, Illinois, California, we have seen a lot of immigration raids, and they are usually conducted by officers who wear this mask. Now, the reaction in the community has been that this inspires terror, not just on the targets, on this supposed criminal aliens, but also on their families, their neighbors, and in the community in general. So that's what's led to this pushback to force the agents to show up just like any police officer, with their faces visible, with their ID and badges also visible, and fear nothing, do nothing wrong, fear nothing wrong. So this is what led to this pushback. Now, I can also tell you that just a few weeks ago, I covered a Senate Judiciary hearing in which one of the high-ranking members of DHS from Homeland Security Investigation said, well, the impact on this is that in today's world, in today's social media world, what this is resulting is in our agents being doxxed, that is, their information publicly exposed, and also being threatened. He relayed a story, an anecdote of one agent just coming on the verge of tears because his family had received threats just for him doing his job. So that's what's behind the other side, why the agents are using this mask. Obviously, this is a very heated topic, and like you mentioned, it's since the federal and the state government are in disagreement, this is very likely to wind up in the all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, we definitely expect a long, lengthy court battle on this one coming from both sides, as you said, very passionate on it. Thank you very much, Julian. We're going to come back to you in just a moment to introduce our guest who's going to be joining us today. But first, let's get through some more headlines happening across the border. One last one, as a matter of fact. An Illinois ICE facility remains open despite a weekend of protests and confrontations outside the facility and questions about its future. Now, on Friday morning, about 100 100 protesters gathered outside the Broadview, Illinois facility. That's just west of Chicago. And they called for an end to the Trump administration's recent immigration crackdown in the Chicago area called, quote unquote, Operation Midway Blitz. Tear gas and pepper balls began to fill the air as federal agents attempted to leave the facility. Tensions escalated again last night when 24 protesters gathered outside the building. And this morning, protesters who set up a tent across the street and could be seen for hours running up to its main gates and yelling whenever they saw federal agents outside. The Department of Homeland Security says they've arrested about 500 people in total in the Chicago area over the last 2 weeks. Time now to bring in our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez, one more time to introduce our very special guest, Mr. David Beer, from the Cato Institute Director, of Immigration Studies. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, Mr. Beer. Why don't you tell us about, first of all, the Cato Institute, what it is, what it does, briefly, and also about the new research that's been published.
The Cato Institute is a nonpartisan, nonprofit public policy research organization, or a think tank, located in Washington, D.C. We've been publishing research on a variety of economic and social policy issues, including immigration, since the 1970s. And really our guiding principles, our research has demonstrated that the United States would be a more prosperous, more peaceful, and ultimately freer society if guided by the principles of free markets, individual liberty, limited government, and peaceful foreign policy.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about the research that you guys are publicizing recently?
Well, we publish a wide range of research on immigration issues, everything from border security to crime and terrorism. We've published research just recently on the effect of immigrants and immigration on the violent victimization rate in the United States, which is a paper that we published last month that looks at crime and immigrant communities from the perspective of victims. So we have a survey that surveys victims and asks them about their birthplace and their citizenship status. And that survey shows that immigrants who are obviously living around other immigrants and in immigrant communities are half as likely to be victims of violent crimes. And if you look at victimization rates by people that the immigrants already know, who are, their family members or other people in their community, people that they previously had contact with, that rate is 65% below the rate for the U.S.-born population, which is so substantial, and an indication that these places are not the violent, crime-infested hellholes that the president describes them to be. That really the immigrant community is actually making a more peaceful society here. And this research on victimization really supports the other research that we've done on the incarceration rates and the population who are in prisons. If you look at that population, it's basically the same. Immigrants are about 65% less likely to be incarcerated in jails, prisons, and detention centers than the U.S.-born population, despite the fact that many immigrants can be incarcerated solely for being an immigrant and having immigrated here illegally or in contrary to the law. So, this is just some of the types of research. We're focused on a lot of empirical research that focuses on new facts and how to really bring home the reality of immigration in the United States in the 21st century.
Yes, along those lines, out here on the border, we have come up with a similar story. My colleague Sandro Sanchez recently did a substantial research on how border communities have some of the lowest crimes in the country, and there's a correlation there with the Hispanic, the immigration origins Here, a lot of our border cities, like El Paso, like Brownsville, upwards of 80% of the population is Hispanic. About 25% is immigrant. And there's a lot of family values that come over, a lot of rejection to the gun culture. And those could be some of the things involved. So yeah, we kind of coincide here on the border with what's going on nationwide. Now, I also wanted to talk to you, Mr. Beer, about the particular research of the Cato Institute regarding drug trafficking culprits and their nationality. I believe your research shows that 80% of those involved in the drug trade are U.S. citizens, not migrants or immigrants.
Yeah, looking nationwide, the percentage of convicted drug traffickers who are U.S. citizens is 80%. So 4 in every 5 convicted drug traffickers in 2024 were U.S. citizens. And the main reason for that, and you can look at different regions. We look at the Southwest border. It's the same story. You look at the Caribbean. It's the same story. Doesn't really matter what part of the country you're looking at. The reality is that U.S. citizens are the ones primarily involved in both bringing in and distributing illicit narcotics throughout the United States. And the primary reason for that is because every U.S. citizen has the right to travel in and out of the country at will. They're subject to much less scrutiny at ports of entry than foreign nationals are when they're entering the United States. And it's actually much more difficult. This is the thing that surprises, the ordinary American thinks, I'm never going to, carry a load of drugs through a place where I know the government is going to be and they're going to check it and do this types of screening. So they just think it's crazy to do that. But it's actually a lot easier to conceal fentanyl or cocaine or any of these hard drugs within your luggage than it is to sneak across the border undetected. And that's the thing that people don't understand. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the situation at the border. It doesn't really matter what administration you're talking about. It's always more difficult to have a human being carrying drugs across the border and try to evade detection of the Border Patrol than it is to slip it in cargo or in luggage that's being brought in legally. And so that's the real explanation for this phenomenon.
Sorry to interrupt, Julian, but we're going to take a really quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Mr. David Beer, Cato Institute Director of Immigration Studies, specifically talking about the fact versus fiction when it comes to immigrant crime. Stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. Welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. Joining us now, El Paso correspondent Julian Resendez and Mr. David Beer, Cato Institute Director of Immigration Studies.
Mr. Beer, I just wanted to expand on your explanation that you just gave us as far as why this conversation is relevant. Right now, there's a lot of talk at the national level coming from the White House and other places, pretty much saying we're after criminal immigrants, and this is the problem that they bring. But according to your research, that's not really what the facts are saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we can look at this phenomenon of immigrant criminality from a lot of different perspectives. The one that I actually find the most compelling is if you just look at the characteristics of who is committing crimes in the United States. It's really young, adult, high school dropout, U.S.-born Americans who are unemployed. And if you look at the immigrant population and unemployed and unmarried, if you look at those characteristics and then you compare that population to the population of immigrants who are also, many of them without a high school degree, they couldn't be more different. I mean, they're twice as likely to be married. They're twice as likely to be employed. They're twice as likely to attend church every Sunday. I mean, these are the characteristics of a population that we wouldn't predict is going to go on and commit violent crimes and engage in gang violence and other things. So I think you can look at it, the statistics on the prison population are what they are. The statistics on arrests and incarcerations and convictions that we have from the state of Texas are what they are. They both show the same picture. The rate of victimization is what it is. But if you just look at the population, you think this is not the population you would go and say, this is the group that's going to be causing trouble, causing problems, creating a lot of crime and societal upheaval in our cities.
All right. Mr. Rivera, I do have one question about the research. I think the facts and the research are pretty clear. I think we've expanded on them today. But my question is, did your research look at how does U.S. citizens got involved in the drug trade? Because the drugs are still coming from Mexico for the most part. They're coming in through the ports of entry. Because, like you said, it's really easy to just put something in your glove compartment. Let somebody put something in the under panels of the car. And what I know for a fact from covering federal agencies here on the border is that only a small percentage of the passenger vehicles get thoroughly inspected. Only about 1 or 2% get passed through the X-rays or have the agents go over the cars with dogs. In commercial traffic, it's a little bit higher, like 15 to 20%, but still, 4 out of 5 trucks are not inspected to the depth that would turn up some contraband. What can you tell me about that?
Well, there's two populations here. There's the population motivated by the profits, and look, I mean, the amount that you could make doing a single drug run is astounding. I mean, it's 3 or 4 times the median wage of the United States. I mean, this is a really significant sum of money that you could make just by bringing some drugs across the border. It might take you a few hours. It seems easy. So there's a big financial upside for people who might not have other ways to make money. And then you have this other group of people who engage in it purely because they need the drugs themselves. There's a personal interest there. Of course, maybe they're also compensated, but it's because they have an addiction and they're willing to do anything to feed that addiction. And again, if you look at the immigrant population versus the U.S. born population, the share of immigrants who have addiction, struggles with addiction, who are using fentanyl and other opioids, it's much lower than it is on a per capita basis than the U.S. born population. So again, we wouldn't predict based on those facts that they're going to be more likely to engage in this cross-border traffic. So, I mean, that's the populations that we're dealing with. And I think you need to address your response to that reality, not to this sort of myth about, immigrants and foreigners being to blame for the drug problems in the United States. Ultimately, all these drugs are coming to feed the drug addiction of Americans. And until you address the demand for drugs, you're going to always find someone who's willing to go get the drugs to feed that market. And as we crack down on the border, as we make it more difficult to bring these drugs in, really doesn't work because of the fact that you can always make the drugs more potent. And that's what we've seen with the transition from heroin to fentanyl. Fentanyl can supply the same market with 50 fewer trips or 1/50th the amount by weight brought in. So again, you can just continue that trajectory downward and create even more potent drugs that are actually much more dangerous for Americans.
Yeah, I would just add an anecdote that we reported here on the border. A few years back, I was asked by my network to, so we have a fentanyl crisis in the U.S. Go find the fentanyl users. And what I found is that here on the border, comparatively speaking, the number is minimal. I think we had that year about 40 overdose deaths, half of them involving fentanyl. When we researched the topic in depth, we found the consumption and the sales problem primarily in places like Northern California, some of the suburbs in Chicago, some of the suburbs on the East Coast. And I think that goes in line with your research about where this is happening and where this is not happening. in what communities?
Yeah, I mean, there's no relationship there's actually a negative relationship between drug deaths and immigration in the United States. And there's a lot of a good research out there that has looked into that relationship. And again, if non-citizens are using at much lower rates, there's going to be, fewer drug overdoses deaths as a result of that. I think what we're really missing here is, again, this is ultimately about the demand for drugs in the United States. This whole issue starts with someone wants to go out and buy narcotics for whatever reason, whether it's an addiction, whether it's pain management, whether it's the cost of legal drugs that are used for pain management. These are all the issues that we need to be addressing as a country. How do we manage pain? How do we address addiction in ways that don't kill people? And we've just completely lost the plot on that. I mean, that conversation has just totally died down, particularly under this administration, but even under the last one. Spent the whole time talking about scanners and all the stuff at the border and more Border Patrol agents, instead of focusing on the people who are affected and the people who are dying. We need to address that population before it's too late.
Super interesting research. What I tell my bosses here is that usually I have a couple of days to do research on stories. You guys probably spend months in this study, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of data to analyze, and you really need to put in the research to contextualize it.
Right. Rudy, do you have any question for our guest?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Mr. Beer, you cover so much more than just, the drug trade when it comes to immigration at the Cato Institute. And we're kind of running out of time here, but I did want to kind of ask you here, because recently we saw the Fed last week kind of talk about how the jobs numbers have come down on the latest job report revisions. And part of that is because of the ICE raids happening at different places across the country. So often we hear the right and the left give their takes on immigration, but at the Cato Institute, you're all about the free market, as you said at the beginning. What's the Cato Institute take on some of these ICE raids happening across the country?
Well, it's a negative for the economy. It's going to increase costs of goods and services for Americans. Look, every person in the United States who's here to work is contributing to the livelihood of everyone else in society, whether they're, a high-skilled worker or a low-skilled worker. I mean, if you're working and producing things of value for other people, that's what the market's all about. So these ICE raids are actually designed to target the most productive, most socially valuable group of immigrants who are here illegally in the United States. I mean, if you wanted to go after people who are ultimately causing problems and imposing costs on society, you wouldn't target the people who have jobs, who are working, who are contributing something of value. So I think it's totally misaligned priorities. Whatever you think about, deportation or, whatever, the response is in terms of illegal immigration, we should have priorities, and they should be focused on the people who are committing crimes, who are threats to the community, and then people who impose other costs, whether it's, living off the government in whatever way, in shelters and so on. But this is not what the priorities of this administration are. I think they've totally sold out what they said during the campaign, which was so much focus on public safety threats and people who are imposing costs on local communities. And now they're explicitly targeting the people who are doing the most to benefit the country economically.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Beer. We really appreciate you having this conversation with us. And we've been speaking with Mr. David Beer, Cato Institute Director of Immigration Studies. If you want to learn more about what the Cato Institute has to say on the topic of immigration, you can visit cato.org/immigration. They also have a nice little bookstore there, and you can buy some of their books that are just filled with all kinds of great data. I've got a few copies on my Kindle myself. So thank you again, Mr. Beer, for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Border Report Live will be back in 1 minute. And welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Midelis. I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. We had so much more to get to today, but we just were having such a great conversation with Mr. David Beer, Cato Institute Director of Immigration Studies, on that new data that shows that U.S. citizens were 80% of all convicted drug traffickers in 2024. Like I said, Cato.org has a wealth of data and lots of information on immigration that you don't really see from the right or the left. So if you're interested in diving deeper, you can visit Cato.org for that. That's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching us. My name is Rudy Midelis, your host, for Julian, Sandra, and Salvador, all the way out in San Diego. Have a wonderful day.